High Prelate Zorval of the Cathar Collective adjusted the crystalline data prism before him, its facets casting cold, logical light across the sterile observation chamber. The subject of his analysis, as it had been for the last 3 standard cycles, was the species designated humanity. The data streams were a chaotic symphony of inefficiency, a torrent of contradictory impulses that defied all Cathar principles of optimized existence. They were a species that waged war over abstract concepts they called faith, composed elaborate sonic patterns they called music for no discernible purpose, and most disturbingly, sustained themselves through the ritualistic dismemberment and thermal alteration of other life forms. Their energy consumption is wildly inefficient, Zorval stated, his voice a series of modulated chimes that echoed slightly in the minimalist room. They convert organic matter into fuel with a net loss of over 90% of the potential energy. A primitive, messy biological process. His subordinate, analyst Threll, manipulated a smaller prism, projecting a holographic image of a human city. It was a riot of disorganized light and movement. Their expansion rate is the primary concern, High Prelate. They have achieved rudimentary faster-than-light travel. Their colony ships are slow, unsophisticated, but numerous. They are like a mold, spreading without a centralized logic. Val's multifaceted eyes focused on a magnified feed. A human family gathered around a table, ingesting incinerated plant matter and the cooked muscle tissue of a domesticated avian. This eating, it is more than sustenance for them. It is a social ritual, a bonding mechanism. They derive pleasure from it. It is a fundamental vulnerability. A vulnerability we can exploit? Threll chimed, a note of inquiry in his tone. Not exploit. Manage, Zorval corrected. Direct conflict is resource-intensive and unpredictable. The humans, for all their flaws, are tenacious. Their history is a litany of self-imposed calamities from which they have, inexplicably, recovered stronger. A direct culling would be untidy. He brought up the galactic chart, a web of shimmering star lanes. His manipulator claw drifted to a remote, uncolonized sector. A single planet was highlighted in a dark, ominous crimson. Planet designation 734. Threll's crystalline structure seemed to retract slightly. The Death World? High Prelate Council archives list 17 separate survey attempts. All failed. The biosphere is aggressively hostile. Every trophic level is saturated with neurotoxins, corrosive agents, or kinetic predatory adaptations. Precisely, Zorval chimed, a sound akin to satisfaction. The flora is largely poisonous. The dominant fauna are armored, venomous, or both. The very air carries spores that can induce cellular breakdown in most carbon-based life. It is a perfect self-contained termination system. He outlined his proposal. The Galactic Council, ever weary of humanity's unpredictable nature, would make them an offer of unparalleled generosity. An entire world gifted to them. A new Eden ripe for settlement. They would not mention the 100% fatality rate of previous explorers. They would simply present the data on mineral wealth and atmospheric composition, omitting the inconvenient biological realities. They are desperate for territory, Zorval concluded. They will see it as a validation of their place in the galaxy. They will accept. They will send their colonists, and the planet will do what we cannot or will not do ourselves. It will solve the human problem. Quietly, efficiently, and with no culpability on our part. Council debate was a formality. The Vreen, with their gaseous forms swirling in contained columns, saw the logic in resource preservation. The arboreal Sylvans, who considered all planets sacred, were convinced that humanity's chaotic nature would only desecrate a more valuable world. The offer was extended. Humanity, young and eager on the galactic stage, accepted with effusive gratitude. The colony ships, filled with pioneers full of hope and naivete, set a course for the world they would christen Xylos. From his observation chamber, light years away, Zorval watched the ships depart. It was, he believed, the most elegant and logical solution he had ever devised. The first hint of trouble came when the lander's external sensors screamed. Dr. Aris Thorne, a biochemist with a survivalist's pragmatism, watched the atmospheric readings fluctuate wildly. Air's breathable, he reported over the internal comms, his voice tight. "But it's thick with organic compounds I've never seen. Recommending full-body filtration suits for all extravehicular activity until we can run a proper analysis." The ramp lowered onto a landscape painted in shades of ochre and a violent, sickly green. The air, even through the suit's filters, smelled of damp earth, rot, and something else, something sharp and peppery like ozone and spice. Jax, a hunter and ex-military scout, was the first one down the ramp, his pulse rifle held at a low ready. He knelt, touching a gloved hand to the reddish soil. "Ground's firm, but it feels springy, like it's alive." The entire ecosystem of xylos was a web of interconnected predatory life. The first casualty happened within the hour. A botanist, enchanted by a vine that pulsed with a soft, internal light, reached out to take a sample. The moment her glove made contact, the vine, a species later dubbed the whisper vine, shot a microscopic barb through the reinforced fabric. She screamed once, a choked, liquid sound, as a paralytic neurotoxin flooded her system. By the time the medical team reached her, she was gone, her body already being dissolved by the vine's digestive enzymes. The days that followed were a blur of terror and loss. The nights were worse. That was when the glaive stingers came out. They were insectoid nightmares, six-limbed creatures that moved with impossible speed, their forelimbs sharpened into chitinous blades. Their tails carried a venom so potent that a single drop could kill a full-grown man in under a minute. They hunted in packs, their multifaceted eyes glowing in the dark, and the colony's prefabricated shelters were barely enough to keep them at bay. Then there were the obsidian carapaces. These were not predators in the conventional sense. They were walking mountains of muscle and armor, reptiles the size of ground cars with shells that shimmered like volcanic glass. They were herbivores, but their sheer mass and territorial aggression made them a constant threat. Laser fire from the colony's defensive turrets simply refracted off their mineral-laced hides, leaving scorch marks that the creatures seemed not to even notice. They would wander through the perimeter fences as if they were made of thread, their thunderous footsteps shaking the very foundations of the settlement. The colonists of prosperity, as they had optimistically named their settlement, were on the verge of collapse. The hydroponic bays had failed. A native fungus, airborne and insidious, had turned their carefully cultivated crops into a gray, toxic sludge. Their protein rations were dwindling, and resupply from Earth was years away. Starvation was no longer a possibility. It was an approaching certainty. It was during a grim meeting of the colony's leadership that Aris Thorne had his epiphany. He was staring at the holographic schematics of a captured glaive stinger, its complex venom sac highlighted in red. He had spent weeks analyzing the toxin, trying to develop an antivenom. "It's a protein chain peptide," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "Highly complex, its structure is incredibly delicate. It denatures completely at 170 degrees Celsius. Lena Petrova, the colony administrator and a woman whose pragmatism was forged in corporate boardrooms, looked at him with exhausted eyes. "An antivenom, Aris. We need food, not medicine for the people who are about to be killed looking for it." "That's not what I'm saying," Aris replied, a strange light in his eyes. He zoomed in on the molecular model of the denatured venom. "Look, when the peptide chain breaks down, it doesn't just become inert. It transforms. The residual components, lysine, glutamates, biochemically, they are flavor enhancers." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jax, his face etched with grime and fatigue, was the one to break it. "You want to eat them, the stingers. Aris, I saw one of those things liquefy a man's insides. You're insane." "Desperate," Aris corrected. "Think about it. We are surrounded by biomass. Aggressive, dangerous biomass, yes, but it's still protein. It's still energy. The Cathar and the Council gave us a world teeming with life. They just didn't tell us it was all designed to kill us. What if we're just looking at the problem from the wrong angle? What if this isn't a planet of monsters? What if it's a planet of ingredients?" The idea was monstrous. It was repugnant. But as another hunger pang gnawed at her stomach, Lena looked at Aris's screen and saw not a diagram of a killer, but the first glimmer of hope. "All right, Aris," she said, her voice steady. "Show us. Show us how we eat our nightmares." The experiment was conducted in a sealed biolab. Jax and his team had managed to trap a glaive stinger in a kinetic net, a dangerous and costly endeavor that had cost them two of their precious cargo drones. The creature thrashed in its containment unit, its bladed limbs scraping uselessly against the transparent plasteel. Aris worked with the precision of a surgeon. Using remote manipulators, he made a precise incision and extracted the venom sac, a pulsating, green-black organ. The sac itself was discarded into an incinerator. The real prize was the meat from the creature's powerful tail, the muscle that drove the deadly stinger. It was a pale, almost translucent flesh, marbled with thin lines of dark tissue. The toxin permeates the entire musculature, but in lower concentrations, Aris explained, his voice tinny over the lab speakers. He placed a small 1-inch cube of the meat onto a high-frequency sonic plate. He activated it, and the meat vibrated, emitting a low hum. The sonics agitate the peptide chains, pre-loosening their bonds. It makes the thermal denaturation more uniform. After 5 minutes, he transferred the cube to a small, induction-heated pan. The moment the pale flesh hit the hot surface, a sound filled the lab, not the sizzle of frying protein, but a sharp, resonant crackle like popping crystals. An aroma billowed up, thick and complex. It wasn't the smell of cooking meat as any of them knew it. It was savory, yes, but with an undercurrent of something else. A clean, mineral scent, a hint of spice, and a deep, primal musk that made the mouth water and the survival instincts scream in equal measure. He cooked it for exactly 90 seconds, turning it once. The exterior was seared to a beautiful golden brown, while the inside remained tender. He let it cool for a moment before spearing the cube with a sterile fork. The lab was silent. Lena, Jax, and a handful of others watched from the observation deck. This was it. The moment they either found a path to survival or confirmed they were truly doomed, Aris lifted his helmet's faceplate. He hesitated for only a second, then put the cube of meat in his mouth. His eyes widened. He chewed slowly, deliberately, his face a mask of intense concentration. He swallowed. For a long moment he said nothing. Aris, Lena's voice was a whisper. He took a deep, shuddering breath. A slow smile spread across his face. "It's extraordinary," he said, his voice filled with a genuine, unadulterated awe. "The flavor. It's like nothing I've ever tasted. It's savory like prime beef, but it has a tingle, a warmth that spreads from the tongue. Not heat like a chili, but a kind of bioluminescence of taste. The glutamates are off the charts. It's the most delicious thing I have ever eaten." That night, for the first time in months, the colony of Prosperity feasted. The glaive stinger meat, carefully prepared under Aris's strict supervision, was distributed in small, precious portions. The fear that had haunted them was still there, but now it was mingled with something new. The revolutionary, empowering act of consuming that which had tried to consume them. They were no longer just prey. The next challenge was the obsidian carapax. Its meat, they theorized, would be safe as the creature was a herbivore. The problem was getting to it. Its shell, a complex lattice of keratin and silicate minerals, was impervious to their cutting tools. They couldn't break it, cut it, or blast it open. It was Jax who solved the puzzle, not with technology but with observation. He'd spent weeks tracking the herds, learning their patterns. He noticed they often congregated near a series of deep geothermal vents that dotted the ochre plains, basking in the rising heat. "We can't break the shell," he announced one evening, sketching a diagram in the dirt. "So we use it. We turn the whole damn thing into a pressure cooker." His plan was audacious. They would use sonic emitters to stampede a carapax, herding it not into a pen, but directly over one of the largest geothermal vents. Once it was positioned, they would trigger a series of controlled explosives around the vent's opening, collapsing the ground and trapping the beast over the column of superheated steam erupting from the planet's depths. The hunt was the most dangerous thing they had ever attempted. It took the coordinated effort of nearly 50 colonists, but it worked. The massive creature, bellowing in confusion and rage, was trapped over the roaring jet of steam. They sealed the chasm with rock and earth, entombing the carapax in its own natural oven. They waited for a full day cycle. When they finally excavated the site, the heat was still intense. The obsidian shell was fractured from the thermal stress, revealing the treasure within. The meat, slow-cooked for 24 hours in its own juices, and the mineral-rich steam, was so tender it fell away from the bone at the slightest touch. It had a deep, earthy flavor, rich and complex, with a texture that was both hearty and delicate. That feast became a legend. They called it the vent-forged barbecue, and it became the cornerstone of a new culture being born from the ashes of their desperation. They were no longer colonists. They were Xylonians. Lena Petrova saw the future. Survival was one thing, but this was something else entirely. This was a resource more valuable than any mineral deposit. She turned her attention to the flora. The whispervine, the plant that had claimed their first life, was her target. Aris's analysis showed its sap was a complex alkaloid neurotoxin, but like the stinger venom, it was unstable. He theorized that a specific enzymatic reaction could break it down. They found the catalyst by accident. A sample of the sap, left in an unsterilized beaker, began to bubble. A native, airborne yeast had colonized it. Intrigued, Lena allowed the fermentation to continue, carefully monitoring the process. The toxic sap slowly clarified, turning from a milky white to a shimmering, amber liquid. The end result was a beverage of incredible potency. It had a clean, floral taste with a hint of the vine's peppery scent, and it induced a mild, pleasant euphoria, a sharpening of the senses that made the colors of xylose seem more vibrant, the flavors of its food more intense. They named it Emberwine, for the warm glow it left in one's chest. Human ingenuity, born of desperation and fueled by an insatiable curiosity, had done the impossible. They had taken a world designed to kill them and turned it into their personal larder. They didn't just survive, they began to craft a cuisine. Aris became a culinary scientist, developing new techniques to prepare the planet's lethal bounty. Jax became a master hunter, a purveyor of the galaxy's most dangerous game. And Lena, the administrator, became a visionary. She saw that what they had was too good to keep to themselves. In the Cathar Collective, High Prelate Zorval reviewed the latest data from the long-range probe orbiting Xylos. The results were perplexing. The human colony had not failed. In fact, its energy signature had stabilized and was now growing. The atmospheric biosignatures were no longer just the planet's native ones. They were now mixed with complex cooked proteins and volatile organic compounds associated with fermentation. "They are still alive," analyst Threll chimed, his tone one of pure confusion. "Their population is increasing. Scans indicate new construction, larger structures. It defies all logic," Zorval stated, cycling through the images. Thermal scans showed large, communal heat sources, far too big for simple habitat warming. Spectrographic analysis detected high concentrations of glutamates and complex sugars in their waste output. "They are not just surviving, they appear to be thriving." He could not comprehend it. 17 advanced survey teams had perished. The planet was a death sentence, yet these primitive, inefficient, biological creatures had somehow mastered it. He flagged the Xylos file for priority review. The human problem had not been solved. It had somehow become infinitely more complex. Calyx, a Glypton trader whose species valued novelty and status above all else, navigated his small scout ship through the uncharted sector. He was following a faint, unusual energy signature he'd picked up on a long-range scan. A bizarre mix of biological and technological readings that didn't match any known civilization. It led him to a crimson-flagged world, a place his charts warned was a Class 4 death world. Curiosity, the driving force of his lucrative, if risky, profession, compelled him to descend. He landed his gleaming chrome vessel a discreet distance from the human settlement of prosperity. The place was a strange mix of rugged, fortified functionality and burgeoning aestheticism. Hard-edged perimeter walls were softened by strings of colored lights, and the central plaza was filled with the sounds of music and conversation. The air carried a scent that was utterly alien to his olfactory sensors, a rich, smoky, spicy aroma that was simultaneously alarming and enticing. He was met not with hostility, but with a cautious welcome. The leader, a human female named Lena Petrova, carried herself with an air of confident authority that Calyx, a connoisseur of power dynamics, found intriguing. "You are a long way from the trade lanes, traveler," Lena said, her eyes appraising his expensive envirosuit and the obvious quality of his ship. "Favors the bold," Calyx replied, his vocalizer translating his native clicks and whistles into the galactic standard. My instruments detected a unique energy profile. I confess, I did not expect to find a settlement on a world with such a formidable reputation. Our reputation is still being written, Lena said with a cryptic smile. You have arrived at a fortuitous time. We are celebrating the full bloom, a local observance. As a gesture of interstellar goodwill, perhaps you would join us for a meal. Calyx was hesitant. Consuming alien food was a risk. His biology was delicate. But the aroma from the central hall was intoxicating, and his desire for a unique story to tell, and perhaps a unique commodity to trade, overcame his caution. He agreed. He was escorted to a large, communal hall. The centerpiece of the room was a massive, open-air cooking pit where large chunks of dark, steaming meat were being carved from a colossal, blackened shell. He was seated at a table with Lena and a quiet, intense man she introduced as Aris Thorn. A plate was set before him. On it lay several thin slices of a pearlescent white meat, seared to a delicate gold on the outside. A light, fragrant sauce was drizzled over it, and a small, crystalline cup filled with a shimmering amber liquid was placed beside the plate. Pan-seared glaive stinger medallions, Lena announced, with a whispervine reduction, and a glass of our finest imberwine. Calyx's translator helpfully supplied the zoological and botanical data for the terms. Glaive stinger, hyperaggressive venomous insectoid, lethality rating 9.3. Whispervine, paralytic toxin flora. He felt a tremor of fear. This was not a meal, it was a plate of active threats. The active toxins have been neutralized, I presume? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Aris Thorn leaned forward slightly. Neutralized is an imprecise term. They have been transformed. The venom's protein structure is deliberately denatured by a precise application of sonic frequencies and heat, which converts the neurotoxin into a complex matrix of savory flavor compounds. The vine's alkaloids are broken down through enzymatic catalysis during fermentation, leaving behind the psychoactive, but non-lethal, esters that give the wine its unique character. It was the most terrifying and fascinating thing Calyx had ever heard. He looked at the humans, who were eating with gusto, their faces showing nothing but pleasure. With a sense of fatalistic curiosity, he picked up the eating utensil and took a small bite of the meat. His universe tilted on its axis. It was not a taste. It was an event. A wave of indescribable flavor crashed over his palate. There was a deep, resonant savoriness, followed by a bright, citrus-like zest, and then a strange, pleasant tingling, a warmth that bloomed in his mouth and spread through his entire being. It was the biosignature of the denatured venom, a ghost of lethality converted into pure culinary bliss. He took a sip of the imberwine. It was crisp and cool, but as it went down, it blossomed into a gentle fire, sharpening his senses and making the flavors of the food even more explosive. He, a being from a culture that had refined cuisine for millennia, had never experienced anything like this. This wasn't food. It was alchemy. It was art forged in the crucible of a world designed to kill. He finished the plate in a reverent silence. Then he looked at Lena, his multifaceted eyes wide with a dawning realization. What you have here, he said, his voice trembling with excitement, is not a colony. It is a treasure. That was the beginning. Calyx, true to his nature, did not keep the secret. He bought a small, heavily insulated cargo container of vacuum-sealed glaive stinger meat and several casks of imberwine for a price that made Lena's eyes water. He returned to the civilized sectors of the galaxy and shared his discovery with a select few of the galactic elite, other Glyptons, wealthy Vreen consortium heads, even a maverick Sylvian botanist. The word spread like wildfire through the hidden networks of the ultra-rich. The story was irresistible. A primitive race, exiled to a death world, had not only survived but had tamed its horrors, transforming the deadliest poisons in the galaxy into the most exclusive and sublime delicacies. To eat Zalonian food was a statement. It was an act of supreme status, a way to taste mortality without the risk, to consume the very essence of danger. Within 5 years, the settlement of prosperity was unrecognizable. It was now officially known as Haven, and it had become the most exclusive tourist destination in the galaxy. The rugged shelters had been replaced by elegant, bioarchitected restaurants and hotels, built from the iridescent shells of the obsidian carapaces and reinforced with the woody cores of iron-hard native trees. Lena Petrova's establishment, the Gilded Stinger, was the planet's crown jewel. Reservations had to be made years in advance and cost a small fortune. Its clientele was a who's who of the galactic 1%. Inside, the air hummed with hushed conversation in a dozen different languages. Wealthy patrons dined on elaborate tasting menus that told the story of the planet's conquest. The menu was a testament to human audacity. There was the Carapax steam heart, a single, massive cut of the tenderest meat from the center of a vent-forged carapax, served on a heated slab of its own shell. There was Whispervine aspic, a shimmering, jellied dish where the vine's toxin was neutralized to a point where it caused a harmless, 30-second paralysis of the tongue, which was then flooded with a cascade of contrasting flavors. The glaive stinger was served in a dozen ways, from raw, flash-cured slivers that provided a phantom tingle of venom, to a hearty, slow-cooked stew that was the ultimate comfort food for a species that had stared into the abyss. Aris Thorne presided over a state-of-the-art culinary laboratory, constantly experimenting, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He had a team of biochemists and chefs working under him, turning newly discovered lethal flora and fauna into the next season's must-have dish. Jax, once a desperate hunter, now ran the most elite guide service in the galaxy, taking thrill-seeking alien elites on carefully managed hunts for the very creatures that had once terrorized his people. He was a living legend, the man who knew how to stalk the ingredients. The irony was not lost on the humans. They had been sent to Xylos to die. The Galactic Council had viewed them as a pest, a biological contamination to be quietly scrubbed from the cosmos. But their core nature, their messy, inefficient, ritualistic obsession with eating, the very thing the Cathar had identified as a primitive flaw, had been the key to their salvation and their incredible success. They hadn't just survived the death world. They had devoured it, digested it, and turned it into a paradise of their own making. High Prelate Zorval stood before the full session of the Cathar Collective Council. The central holographic display was not showing battle schematics or expansion charts. It was showing economic projections. The subject was the human colony on planet designation 734, now known galaxy-wide as Haven. The gross domestic product of the human settlement on Haven now exceeds that of 7 of our mid-tier member worlds, Zorval chimed, his tone flat and devoid of emotion, though the data itself was a screeching indictment of his original plan. Their sole export is prepared organic matter, food. They have established a galactic monopoly on what is now termed hazard-class cuisine. The chamber was filled with the low hum of silent, stunned computation. The humans had not only failed to die, they had become a significant economic power. They had done it with no advanced technology, no military might, and no political maneuvering. They had done it with fire and knives, and a biological imperative the Cathar could barely comprehend. They have turned a planetary weapon into a luxury good, analyst Threll added, his prism glowing with new data. Glypton trade routes have shifted. Vreen capital has been invested in Haven's infrastructure. We are receiving petitions from other species to classify glaive stinger venom and whispervine sap as strategic cultural resources, subject to trade regulation. The logic was undeniable and galling. The Cathar's perfect, clean solution had backfired in the most spectacularly untidy way imaginable. They had intended to create a graveyard and had instead created a gold mine, owned and operated by the very species they had sought to contain. They had handed their problem the keys to a kingdom. The debate that followed was tense. One faction argued for a blockade, for classifying the planet's unique biology as a galactic biohazard, effectively quarantining the humans and their culinary empire. Another, more pragmatic faction pointed out that such a move would alienate their powerful trading partners, like the Glyptons and the Vreen, who were now Haven's biggest customers. It would be an economic and diplomatic disaster. Val listened, his mind processing the cascading failures of his own logic. He had analyzed humanity as a problem to be solved, a variable to be eliminated. He had focused on their weaknesses, their emotional irrationality, their inefficient biology, their tribalism. He had completely overlooked their greatest strength, a perverse, indomitable adaptability. They didn't just overcome obstacles. They consumed them, absorbed them, and made them part of their own story. Where the Cathar saw a fatal error in the planet's design, the humans had seen a pantry. The council session ended in a stalemate, a rare and unsettling outcome for the logically minded Cathar. They could do nothing. To act against Haven now would be to admit their original intent, a political scandal of immense proportions. To leave them was to watch them grow in wealth and influence, a constant, living monument to Cathar fallibility. Later, in his private chamber, Zorval found a small, unmarked package waiting on his data terminal. There was no sender identification, a breach of protocol that should have triggered a security alert. His manipulators opened the simple, gray box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, lay two items. One was a thin, exquisitely crafted invitation, printed on paper made from some Zalonian fiber. In elegant script, it read, "The Gilded Stinger cordially invites High Prelate Zorval to be our guest. The table is set." Second item was a single, small object that seemed to drink the light in the room. It was a perfect cube, the size of his smallest manipulator digit. It was a deep, translucent amber, and a soft, warm light pulsed within it. He recognized it from the intelligence reports. It was a crystallized Imberwine drop, a confection made by slowly reducing the potent liquor until it formed a solid, jewel-like candy. It was said that allowing one to dissolve on the tongue was an experience that bordered on the spiritual. It was also one of the most expensive foodstuffs in the galaxy. He picked it up. It was cool and smooth to the touch. He held it before his multifaceted eyes, watching the gentle light pulse within. This was the summation of his failure. This tiny, beautiful object was distilled poison, rendered harmless and desirable by the very beings he had condemned. It was chaos contained. It was irrationality made sublime. His entire existence was predicated on logic, on the predictable, orderly flow of data and energy. Sustenance for his kind was a matter of absorbing a nutrient paste of precise chemical composition. Pleasure was derived from the successful computation of a complex problem, and yet he felt a flicker of something else. Something that was not logical, a low-frequency signal that was not data but curiosity. What would it be like? What was this sensation they called taste? This experience for which creatures would travel across the galaxy and pay a king's ransom. He stood there for a long time, the invitation on the desk and the glowing cube in his hand. The humans had not only conquered a world, they were beginning to conquer the very foundations of his understanding of the universe. He, the architect of their intended demise, was now a target of their cultural expansion. And in the sterile silence of his chamber, faced with the ultimate symbol of his gastronomic error, High Prelate Zorval found himself, for the first time in his long, logical life, undeniably tempted. The question was no longer what the humans would do, but what he would do now that they had invited him to dinner.